Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show after a considerable hiatus. But I felt the need to pick up my recorder and address a myth that bothers the dickens out of me. The Great Pyramids were not tombs. They weren't. No bodies have ever been discovered there. The sarcophagus was never completed. But supposedly, Pharaoh Khufu had this huge place built for himself and didn't even decorate it with a single hieroglyph. That's not the way the ancient Egyptians did things. They loved their hieroglyphs. There were pictorial instructions of how to get to the other side, how to be reborn as Osiris. You don't forget your road map when you're going on a road trip. Well, today's GPS, that doesn't really hold as much water, but you understand what I'm saying. So let's look at where we get this myth. There's two pieces of evidence that support it. And they are a good piece of evidence. First of all, there's what's called the inventory stela, which is a big slate of sandstone that's been carved into. Might be sandstone, might be granite. I'm not 100% sure. And it basically is Khufu saying, look at all these things I own. And it's got your pyramids, it's got your sphinx, it's got temples, it's got all sorts of things on it. Yes, modern day rappers were not the first to invent, self-aggrandization. No. By the same token, he didn't say he built all that. He said, look at everything in my domain. Remember that. Secondly, the historian Herodotus, I believe it was Herodotus, is the one that brings us the story of Khufu being the one to erect the pyramid. Now, Herodotus, and indeed, well before him, the Greeks and Romans and everybody were visiting Egypt because, let's be honest, there's a lot of great stuff to see there. Just like in the 19th century when English gentlemen would go on the grand tour of Europe and go and see things, hey, the Romans and the Greeks would do it too if they had the opportunity. Not your poor farmer that's trying to get some grapes growing, but medium wealth kind of people. They would be more than happy to visit the pyramids. Heck, Caesar went to see the pyramids. Mark Antony went to see the pyramids. Augustus went to see the pyramids. Everybody did it. So, where are we going with this argument? All I want to say is we do have evidence that supports Khufu as being the one who at least signed off on the pyramids. I'm making this distinction. By the time Herodotus, Julius Caesar, etc., were visiting the pyramids, they were already thousands of years old. Look at our literature from 1,000 years ago. You have, let's go the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. You have some Arthurian legends. The Domesday Book. It's not really a lot of information to go by. That's 1,000 years from our present time. We're not talking the thousands of years to when the pyramids were built, which is what we're going to address. Secondly, the only mummy that has ever been found in the Great Pyramids was a later burial. Sometime around King Herod's time. Yes, that King Herod, the one that features in the Jesus scriptures. That very King Herod, that's about the time this mummy was put into the Great Pyramid. And the Great Pyramids are so mysterious there was an entrance to the Great Pyramid. By 700, 800 AD, that secret was lost. Even though we can see 700 years earlier, they knew exactly how to get in there. All that knowledge is lost, gone. So one of the caliphs, forgive me, I forget his name, decided to tunnel in. And imagine that, tunneling into a pyramid. We're talking granite blocks. And he found that there was another entrance. But he didn't know that. In just 700 years, possibly less, that knowledge was lost. So we're expecting these priests to have accurately recollected everything when we can't even recall our own history with modern technology, modern science, modern archaeology, etc., etc., etc. Let's go to the building of the pyramids. Now, I'm not going to tell you ancient aliens. I'm not going to tell you multidimensional beings. I'm not going to hit you with ascended masters. No, I don't need that. Our problem is Herodotus tells it was a tomb built in Khufu's time. Careful with those words. I'm not saying Khufu had nothing to do with the pyramids. I'm saying he just wasn't buried there. Because the sarcophagus wasn't finished. It's actually cracked. No pharaoh worth his salt would ever dream of that. There's no hieroglyphics on the wall. As I mentioned, no pharaoh would ever dream of that. And you can make an argument he died early, even though apparently he was pretty old. And it was a very ambitious project. And this is where it starts to get impossible. We have teams that get together to try to show how it was possible to get the blocks in place. But the essential calculation remains the same. You have to put a block in place every 3 seconds over a period of like 60 years to get anything close to the Great Pyramid. That's not even the hard part. As somebody whose summer project was building a concrete deck, I have a little insight into this. What's the first thing you do? Before you stack your bricks, before you mix your mortar, before you even assemble a team, what's the first thing you need to do to make sure whatever you build is going to be good? You have to level it. Somebody leveled the entire Giza plateau. And somebody planned for there to be 3 pyramids on it. Now, they could have been leveling at the same time as building. I'm not taking that away because you got to start somewhere. And the pharaohs, and I'm using plural, had 3 resources. Let's take away the idea Khufu built it alone. Let's look at this as a mega project. Something like today when they're building the Hoover Dam, although the Hoover Dam's a good example. What did they have? They had time, they had money, and they had people. So they could build the project in a reasonable amount of time. And we had technology that tripled our manpower. The Egyptians basically have copper tools. I'm willing to allow the pharaoh used his vast wealth, traded with other empires to maybe get his best workers some iron tools from neighboring kingdoms. But we're talking granite. This is what the Canadian Shield is made of. This is pretty hard stuff. I grew up on the Canadian Shield. I've thrown rocks at the Canadian Shield. I've hit it with a hammer. I've done some. That is pretty tough rock. But somebody leveled it. That is an impressive achievement. And leveling takes time. It's very painstaking. Again, I spent this summer building a concrete deck, and the first thing you have to do, make sure it's level. So, whoever the ancient Egyptian engineer was, the Imhotep is generally referred to, but they don't tell us the relationship. They don't tell us anything like that. So what we're left with is some sort of genius who decided we need to level all this, and then we're going to build stuff on it. That's pretty smart. Although, the ancient Egyptians were not stupid. The ancient Mesopotamians were not stupid. The ancient Babylonians were not stupid. The only reason we don't have more ziggurats around today is they were made of mud brick. So it's actually an innovation for the Egyptians to use granite and also to move granite, to do all this sort of thing. Now, as I said, let's remove the restriction of having to do this in one person's lifetime. Why? Because it makes things really, really, really hard. Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is the best explanation. So let's assume Imhotep approaches a pharaoh. I'm not really good with the lines of succession with the ancient Egypt. I apologize. But this got me fired up today, and I decided to record an episode because it's been a while, and I kind of want to get back into doing this. But anyway, so we'll accept Imhotep as being the architect because the Egyptians were really big on names. Every Egyptian pharaoh believed he was the literal embodiment of Horus. And when he died, he would become Osiris. So even though each Egyptian pharaoh had their own individual name, they still were the living representation, the embodiment of Horus on earth. So just because I sign my name to something doesn't mean nobody else participated in it. It's like a ribbon cutting ceremony where your local politician who maybe just got elected, they had nothing to do with that art gallery or museum or whatever the heck it might be, but they're still the ones getting to cut the red ribbon. Let's accept Khufu as the one that cut the ribbon. Hey, no disgrace there. It's not bad being the person that was there when it all magically came together. Probably quite the honor. But him signing his name does not invalidate anything. As a matter of fact, again, it's like signing a check. This is in honor of all my ancestors who are Horus. We are Horus. I hate to bring this up. It's kind of like Rey in Last Jedi saying, I am all the Jedi, because she is representing all the Jedi at that moment. Wow, I never thought I'd use that movie talking about ancient Egypt. But anyway, so now that we've accepted that we have a longer time frame to work with, let's go back to what we said about the Hoover Dam. People, money, time. Oh, the pharaohs had that. The Nile floods, and it needs to be worked, and then you produce your grain, and then there's a couple months where there's pretty much not much to do. So, the ancient pharaohs, going back almost into mythology pharaohs, realized, I got a bunch of people sitting around with nothing to do. I need stuff done. Like every ruler ever has said. We need to build a bridge here. We need to build a dam here. We need to do all this sort of stuff. So the pharaohs would conscript those workers into his service. And they were paid. They were given rations. Debatable whether that was better than slave labor, worse than slave labor, but they were not slaves. These were people basically paying their taxes in specie. It wasn't necessarily in money, it was in labor. And money in the ancient times is something entirely differently. Maybe I'll do an episode on that. But if we have people, money, and time, we can see it doesn't make sense for a pharaoh to build a temple as a tomb. Quite the opposite. It makes sense for them to build the complex, and it's referred to as the Giza complex, because it's more than just the 3 pyramids. There's mustabas, I believe it is, little individual pyramids. And this makes sense to me. People are buried around the pyramids, just like people are buried behind a church. It's kind of keeping their souls sacred. Kings, us pharaohs, are buried in the Valley of the Kings. They didn't want to be grave robbed. So, either Imhotep was an idiot savant, where he's like, hey, we can build this big tomb for you, Pharaoh. Or, we can build this big diversion for you, and then we can build a tomb for you over here. And the Pharaoh was also a little numb in the head and said, yes, I'll divide my workforce for these two things and still accomplish the impossible for both. Or we can accept we have more time to work with. Pharaohs had the money. Pharaohs had the people. And if we allow there to be more than one pharaoh in our time frame, this is no longer an impossible task. Again, people, money, and time. The atom bomb was rushed into production because it was believed Germany was working on one at the same time. What did they do? They brought the best people in. Einstein, Oppenheimer, you name it, the who's who. Pretty much anybody that wasn't working for the other side. And they got it done. Pharaohs had basically the same thing. We have a whole plan here. We're going to level this plateau. We're going to build 3 giant structures, possibly the Sphinx. I'm of the opinion the Sphinx is older. I can't ignore the geological evidence that there was rain damage done to the Sphinx, and that doesn't fit very neatly within the time frame. But it's possible it was put there first. That's a softer limestone that it's easier to work with. We're getting tricky there in terms of history. I don't know if I want to put it all the way back at 10,000 BC when it was still raining, but it could have been possible there were other raining periods. Archaeologists aren't looking in this direction, and Dr. Awas really doesn't want anybody exploring the pyramids because he's so determined everything should remain classical in the way he sees things, he won't allow it. So, when we have money, people, and time, no pharaoh wants to be buried there because that's not the purpose of it. And only the Great Pyramid has a burial chamber in it. So, let's look at this instead as a ceremonial complex. And it makes more sense that way. 3 pyramids. People with ceremonies love the number 3. Not really sure why, but it's an undisputable fact. 3 appears everywhere. You got 3 pyramids. The ancient mystery religions love the number 3, as well as modern mystery religions. And having it as a ceremonial complex makes more sense. Occam's razor. I have to make less assumptions if I give myself more time and redefine it from a tomb to a ceremonial complex. The smallest pyramid would be for your first degree, your initiates or something like that. The middle pyramid, middle degree. And the Great Pyramid, with all of its different chambers and stuff, could be its whole ritual on its own. Oh, all of a sudden the Giza complex makes sense. And it doesn't require ancient aliens. It doesn't require anything. It doesn't require pharaohs to be building this decoy and then building another one somewhere else. They were rich. They weren't that rich. They didn't have that many people. But if we just extend the time window and allow Khufu and his brethren that signed off on the later ones, because remember, this is an immense investment of time, energy, and resources. But if you're building as you go, like I suggest, you can start all 3 at the same time. You're concentrating on the biggest one, and the pharaoh who's in charge gets to sign off, just like a politician in modern days cutting the ribbon. So, instead of tombs, it's a ceremonial complex. It's a site of worship. We know people are drawn to it. People say there's a mystical energy, there's a numinous presence there. And this theory makes sense. I don't need to invent trans-dimensional beings. All I need is people, money, and time. And the only reason we restrict time is because Herodotus said so. That's the bottom line, because Herodotus said so. So, long way to get here, but I had to establish a lot of base work, just like they did with the pyramids. What do you think? Leave a comment down below. But I think it makes vastly more sense than somebody's vanity project. Somebody that didn't leave an inscription when everybody else is leaving inscriptions. Egyptian artifacts are adored because of how ornate they are. Egyptian artifacts have that wonderful idea that they're ancient and beautiful at the same time. We dig up a bit of pottery, and the average person can't appreciate that pottery because it's a piece of pottery. I got that in my kitchen. But when you dig up an Egyptian artifact, aside from kitchen utensils and the normal rigmarole, it's usually pretty spectacular looking, inside and out. With that, leave with something to think about. Thank you for joining us for the Silverlight Show after so long. I guess I appear around Super Bowl every year and then I disappear. But I'm going to try to make a habit of recording more regularly. Because I kind of miss this. And I miss my audience. So, thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining us. And we hope you have a fantastic day. Please like, please subscribe, etc., etc. You know the deal. Everybody else does it. Take care now.